Hi, this is PatZi with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And today I've got a great story. Oh, wow, this is amazing. A wonderful interview with Jeffrey Konvitz. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hi, Patsy. It's nice to be here.
It's nice to see you. This is exciting because I did not read your famous book until 2020. I lived in
This-
Europe when it came out, and I want to show it to people again. And because everybody's recognizing this, I'm sure. The Sentinel came out 1974, right? So here we have it.
I can tell you a little anecdote about The Guardian if you want to hear that for a second.
Absolutely.
That's my wife, who was a big time Ford model, and that's after the Walking Dead makeup people were done with her.
That you're married to that one? Oh,
Yes.
okay.
There's also a cover with the online book version of me as the Sentinel, and you can't tell. The makeup artists were unbelievable. It took us days to get out of the makeup.
I can tell you, I don't know if I would have bought the Sentinel. Such a scary cover, but I think you sold over 7 million of those ones.
Somewhere in there, five, six, seven.
Oh,
It
who's counting? Yeah.
it went to 52 printings, and the hardcover did okay. Back in those days, the real business was mass market paperback, and Random House bought those rights from Simon and Schuster. By the way, 30 companies had rejected the Sentinel, just turned it down, and Simon and Schuster picked it up for nothing. I think it was $2,000. And then my agent called me and said, things have changed. They sold the paperback rights to Random House Valentine, mass market, for $600,000, and the movie rights to Universal for $500,000, and foreign rights we have about $500,000 worth of offers. This is 1974, and I had $10 in the bank. I was laughing. I said, "This is impossible, impossible." It
But
happened.
but see that you didn't give up because this is a
No,
good thing for everyone to listen to that you were rejected over and over.
over 30 times.
I interviewed one guy, he decided to self-publish because he was rejected 6 times.
Well, back in those days, you couldn't self-publish.
Yeah,
You either
yeah,
ate it or you didn't.
exactly.
And I just, my agent believed in the book. He's become a big time agent in the book business, to say the least. And at that time, he was at the William Morris Agency. He was a friend of mine. He says, "We keep putting it out there. Let's see what happens." And out of the blue, in came Simon and Schuster, and the rest is history. It just everywhere I went, everyone was reading the book.
Well,
Period.
you are an overachiever. You're one of those overachievers. You become a lawyer, then you go to Hollywood, you become a major agent, you become a major producer. I think two of your companies were listed on NASDAQ. My goodness,
Yeah,
like not
yeah.
just one. You had to
I
do
was
two.
vice chairman and president of one and managing director of the
And
other. We made
yeah,
some good pictures.
that's it. But and now this one is self-published, and people might hear that and they'll say, "Oh, that's bad." Uh-uh. This is chutzpah. This is Yiddish kop, because now this it was beshert that you didn't do this book even 10 years ago, because now with streaming video, this is going to be it's going to be a runaway best hit streaming video. I know it because you're naturally cinematic, I think.
Right out of law school, I went into the film business, and soon thereafter, I was the vice president of production at MGM. I was writing the book at night, and believe it or not, we'll discuss it, I assume, but it took me two shots at Circus of Satan. The second time was took me 25 years, a massive amount of research. I read at least 150 books, every real character. It's all real events, and I run my fictional plot through it. It took years of work, but of course I was practicing law at the time. I made one movie with Leslie Nielsen, Spy Hard, that did a lot of business, and I would keep coming back to this. But what you just said was one of the reasons that prompted me to continue to write is that there were new markets. If I got turned down by everybody at the major book companies, I could ebook it or I could self-publish. And that gave me a great sense of comfort that all this work wouldn't go to waste. It was very important to me.
It is, because it would have been picked up by any of the publishing houses. They just on the basis of your previous books, but that you now have control. You can do what Lee Child is doing with his Reacher. He controls who's going to be in it, how they're going to treat the characters. And this gives you a lot of power.
What happened here is I was grossly unhappy with the Sentinel hardcover, and I swore the next hardcover Dust Jacket I would not allow this to happen. Now, the paperback, the mass market versions of the Sentinel and the Guardian were terrific. And then I wrote another book about politics and treachery and murder, Monster of Taylor Loch Ness, which was more about African mercenaries and oil executives after the Biafran Civil War moving into the North Sea, and they were pretty nasty characters. But that cover was good too. But this time around, after 25 years of work on this book, which is kind of like a life's work. I first started writing it in the 70s and it didn't work because I tried to fictionalize real events. I put it away for 16 years and then my new wife found it and said, "This is pretty good." I read it again and didn't like it. Are you still there?
Yes.
You popped off the screen.
No, I wanted to show the book so that people.
Okay. So I didn't like it. And then the epiphany hit me. I said, I can't fictionalize this. I got to use all real events and 50% of the characters, from Walter and Moses Annenberg to William Randolph Hearst to Franklin Delano Roosevelt to Big Tim Sullivan, the Bathhouse John Coghlan to Johnny Torrio. All these characters have to be in the book and they have to be real. And then I have to weave a fictional plot through it, a plot that collides with real events and is stopped and requires a detour, or changes the real events, their implications and the consequences, or I come around to the other side of the real events and the real events propel my story. It was a monumental task to pull this off. I kept going back and having to rewrite beginnings to set up and twist endings. And I'm not sure I ever had any intent to go to the major publishers with this. I wanted control. I wanted to design the cover, which I did. If anyone doesn't like the cover, they can blame me. And I wanted to design the content. I wanted to design the content. It was the story I wanted to tell. I didn't want anyone telling me I got to take out this paragraph or not. And being an appellate lawyer too, I know how to self-edit. I learned. And my first draft of this book was 1,200 pages. I had to take out 700. And I did it. It took time. But I wanted to do this myself. So we formed a publishing company, my partner and I. We put up the money ourselves for the promotion. There's a giant ad today in Publishers Weekly, 4 pages that we took. We did blasts. We're doing ebook discounts. I've done tons of radio shows and podcasts. If I sell one book, I'll still be proud of myself. It's that simple.
It's even better than that. because the truth is now you're going to hear a lot of ching each time the book is sold. It's coming to you. When the money went through the publisher, people will hear he sold 7 million books, or they'll think you made $7 million.
Not even close.
The public, I know, but the public.
Yeah, by the time the money came down the pike and we got our advance back and Simon and Schuster took their money, yeah, I made a little more, but it was the advance. That was it. And on the other books, it was the advances.
Yeah.
Here, I control the movie and miniseries rights. I doubt it would be a movie. It's too big.
No.
But a miniseries, yes. And the interesting thing, to put it in perspective for any reader or author looking at this thing to see what this is about, it's about the Irish mob from 1900 to 1913 that controlled every major city in the country through control of the police departments. They controlled the vice and the crime and the graft and the kickbacks, and they funneled the money in New York back to Tammany Hall and in Chicago to the aldermen. Bathhouse John Coughlin, Hinky Dink Mike Kenna, and in St. Louis to the Eddie the Rat Egan, who controlled all Vice in St. Louis, and to Big Jim Thompson, his machine out of Kansas City. And by the way, it's in the book. His little gopher who ran around in Kansas City, and it's in the book, was Harry Truman. So a lot of these guys, and the Annenbergs, Walter and Moses Annenberg, the Annenberg Museums and the Annenberg School, they all started as gangsters. It's
Well,
that simple.
this is what is so great about the book. I learned so much. And now, whenever I watch PBS and at the end it says Annenberg Foundation.
Yeah, it's a different connotation.
Exactly. And about Truman and about this, of course, it's obviously many years of research. All the books you've read, it's all come into this. But in the end, it's a book. You had to put it together. You needed to have some fictional characters and then weave all of these real people. And it's
And by the way,
beautifully.
and then twist the plot and fool everybody. No one can guess the end of this book. I've yet to meet anyone who can do it.
Well, you work so many years and you finally put them to bed and say, okay, kids, get out there and make money for me.
What's really good is I can hold it in my hand.
Yeah.
It's something. It exists. And when that first book was sent to me by my production company, I said, wow, it's actually real.
It's real.
There was a very gratifying feeling. I'm a reasonably humble guy. I think I'm very important, but really made people around me happy. It made me happy that I didn't stop, that I kept going. And if you want to put the book in a frame of reference for an audience that's familiar with movies, there was a film called Gangs of New York with Leonardo DiCaprio and one of my favorite actors whose name escapes me for the moment, the English actor or the Scottish actor or the Irish actor, forget it. And that was in 1860 when the Irish first started arriving in the United States. And then there was a big hit series called Boardwalk Empire, which begins in 1920. And apart from one or two epilogues personal to my lead character in this book, my book ends at 1920. So it's the middle period. It explains what happened between Gangs of New York and Boardwalk Empire. And it's
And
very specific.
I love history and I love when you discover an area that hasn't been milked. And wow, this combination of fictional and real characters that everybody knows, household names. I want you to talk about your fictional characters, but also about one of your main characters really is New York City.
Yes.
I've been to New York City many times, but it's mostly between the Algonquin Hotel and the Plaza. I didn't know all of this other stuff.
I actually did a movie about the Algonquin Hotel, about someone at the Round Table back in the
Yeah, yeah.
20s. I forget the title, it's so long ago. Dorothy Parker and the Round Table, was that it? Yeah, that was it. Dorothy Parker and the Round Table. We did that in 1992, I think. And we distributed it around the world, and Miramax bought it from us. I had a major screaming fight with the infamous Harvey Weinstein in the middle of the Hotel du Cap in Cannes that they heard all the way to Germany. So very proud of the fact that I took zero baloney from him. But that's another story. We're not here to talk about that. Where was I?
New York. We're talking about New York.
I got lost
I love
already.
New York.
Oh, New York. Well, why New York? New York was where everyone funneled into initially. So New York was the head of the Irish snake. Everybody, in fact, in Kansas City, they referred to the Pendergast Empire as Little Tammany. But Tammany Hall was a product, it was nativist at first. Then it became populated by the heads of all these Irish gangs, the Boodle Boys, the Tunnel Gangs, the Wyos. When they all disappeared, most of these guys became politicians. Tammany Hall was filled with gangsters. And they controlled the vote, the Jewish vote in the Bowery. When the Jews started arriving, they pushed the Germans up to what is now Harlem. And then the Italians moved and then pushed the Irish out of the 5 Points. But it was Tammany Hall that controlled everything, and they controlled it through the police department. And when the Becker Rosenthal murders happened in 1912, it was 4 Jewish gamblers protecting their turf who hired 4 Jewish killers, and I guess it was 3 Jewish killers and one member of the gang who was Italian, but he was basically Jewish like them, to kill a Jewish gambler who moved into the Tenderloin district, the high-end vice district, also called Satan's Circus by the Protestant clergy, which is a bit behind the name. The name has 2 meanings. And then the Becker Rosenthal murders broke the connection between the police department and Tammany Hall. Now, there have been books written about the Becker Rosenthal murders. The one I read in the 70s was Against the Evidence. There was one called Satan's Circus just about that trial. The trial is only 20 pages in my book, but it got me going. And it also is a key figure in the book, not because of the trial, because it leads to resolutions of key characters who were at the trial. Herbert Bayard Swope, who became the most famous newspaper reporter in the nation and Undersecretary of Defense under Roosevelt, and William Randolph Hearst, and a whole bunch of other people, and Bat Masterson, who's a major player in my book, who was my anti-hero's best friend. So a lot of it came out of the Becker Rosenthal murders, at least in the denouement of the book, but most of the book has nothing to do with it. It just sets up the plot and the real events that the plot runs through.
It explains why we have some playing cards there on the cover.
Our hero was a poker player.
Yeah.
And a fighter and a gambler. And he plays with a deck of cards throughout the book and puts names of people in the plot and mixes them together until the right combination comes out. So there's a lot of poker reference. I'm a poker player. I usually play in the World Series of Poker, but can't this year because I'm promoting this book. So I'll just have to wait for a year. But there's a lot of poker references in the book, and that's why you have the cards. But there's another reason for the cards, and I'm not gonna tell you and blow it.
So
Find out by reading. Hopefully, someone will read the book and find out.
I'm sure you'll get lots of comments.
I also want to make a point to anyone who wants to be a writer and wants to go the indie publishing route. Even though I'd had 3 books published by major publishers, I wasn't concerned about the business. They did everything. Here I had to learn a business. Not only learn about a business, I finally realized that the way to sell the book had to be on online orders through Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Kobo, all these online sellers, because to get it into a bookstore, number one, the discount rate was so high for the hardcover, we'd make no money. The book's too big. It's 531 pages. If it was 200 pages, that's a different story. But we would make no money. But number two, we'd have to manufacture 5 or 10,000 books. You're talking about an investment of well over $150,000. And unless you're a very rich person and don't give a damn, I ain't. My partner, he's well off, but he's no dope. That's a massive investment. And if the book doesn't sell, and remember, you had to make this decision before all these sensational reviews came out, you're taking a huge financial risk. So most indie writers, if they go the indie route, will publish through the indie mechanism on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, and a bunch of others. And in fact, my production company sets that up, and that's worldwide. This book is available in English worldwide.
Well, with your background in production and all of this, you're way ahead of most people in understanding marketing.
You have to understand marketing. You have to understand production. I have my own picture, hopefully starting in the spring, but I'm finance counsel and executive producer. I've been on several pictures like that recently, but on one, it collapsed twice. We've put it back together. It's integral. It's very complicated in terms of the structure and the tax credits and everything else, and the cast, assembling the cast without making cash offers. Some of the dynamics are similar to the book business that I had to learn. Some aren't. They're different businesses. Hopefully this will become a mini series or a gigantic 2-part movie or a 1-part movie. I have some control over it because I know where to go in the business to make it happen. But otherwise, I don't have control. It's a creative piece of IP. People are going to want to do it or they're not going to want to do it. It's that simple. And I didn't crawl out from under a rock yesterday. I know that business.
And yeah, because we need a new good streaming series because
Yes, I just watched two fabulous ones. I'll even name one of them.
what?
The Day of the Jackal on NBC. It was Andy, the guy who won the Oscar. What's his name? Whatever. He won the Oscar for playing the scientist who was paralyzed. Eddie Redmayne. It's fantastic. They're
Okay.
doing season
Well,
2 now.
when you have to create the fictional characters, tell us about how you made that decision and you needed a little backstory for each of the fictional characters.
I wanted to create a character, call him our anti-hero, who is respected by everybody in the quasi-criminal community and political community. He's honest. He's fair. He's very talented, but he's done some pretty nasty things in his life. And as you go through the book, you see him, part of his motivation is to atone for events that he's put in motion early in his life. This is true for many people. It's not necessarily true for me, but it was necessary for the character, the arc of the character, to have someone who did such heinous things early on and then spends the rest of his days, including virtually this book, coming to grips with his past and atoning for events in his life. Now, the other part is the psychology part of the main character. A lot of that is me. There's a lot in the book about justice, ethics, morality, life and death, the afterlife, the current life. How do you extract revenge, justice, the courts, or the hand with a hammer? There's a lot of that in there, especially in the conversations between McGinnis, our anti-hero, and Rabbi Bershinsky, who taught him how to fight. A lot of that is me. Those are my beliefs. So I combined a fictional character who starts off regretting his life at the end and all the damage he caused, even though everything turned out to be reasonably satisfactory to him in his life, but he left a lot of blood behind. And not that he was a bloodthirsty guy, these were events that he caused to happen, and the way he reacted to it caused a lot of pain. That was a character that was really attractive to me. Now, Monahan, the bad guy, was attractive to me because, number one, apart from how violent he was and what the violence he caused around him, he was a political creature. He controlled Tammany Hall, and it was the mix of this innate sense of violence and innate sense of political power combined that I found attractive. Now, a lot of this comes out of one of my favorite books, which I'm sure most of the people listening to this podcast know, and that's Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. And there are 50 different interpretations of that book. I've read it 20 times. It's only 150 pages long. And they made a movie out of Apocalypse Now, but was effectively The Heart of Darkness. And I believe in everybody that there is a dark side and a light side buried in the psyche. And if you remove the rule of law, like happened between 1900 and 1913 with the politicians, the police, the gangs, everybody was corrupt, then the dark side will come out. And that's one of the reasons people like reading about organized crime. It's their dark side. It's like a magnet. Hey, my dark side likes this. And I can satisfy my dark side by reading this or watching this on screen without going out and killing anybody. So I think there's a lot of psychology in the book. In fact, in many of the reviews, they talk about the depth of this book, that how I wove in all these ethical and moral issues while creating nonstop action and violence. I'm very proud of that it wasn't just beat this guy over the head with a sledgehammer.
hopefully when
They did that too, but that's
yeah,
besides the
yeah.
point.
Hopefully when you do this streaming series, they'll let you have that input so you can make sure there's motivation instead of just one killing after another. Because I turn those programs off where it's just one murder after another.
In fact, if you ask me, PatZi, some of the most important scenes of the book are
Are
like one, the conversation between McGinnis, our anti-hero, and Rabbi Bershinsky about the afterlife. What does he believe in? What does McGinnis believe in? What is justice? That goes on for 5 or 6 pages. It's intense.
yeah,
It's two people who loved each other and now have come clashing because this rabbi does not want any more violence. And McGinnis says, that's the only way I will ever achieve my goals. I can't wait for the afterlife like you can. I don't believe in it. And if I die, we'll find out whether you're right or I'm right. Because
let's
the rabbi says, you're going to get yourself killed. He says, then we'll know which of us was right.
exactly all of the deep thought that you put into it, the conscience, the goodness of people. There are good people in here. They're not all killing people in
No,
horrific
no,
ways, although you've
no.
got a lot of that. For people who don't know, let's explain Tammany Hall first, because for those of us who know this period a little bit, we know what Tammany Hall was, but when a lot of people don't understand what it was and what in the world they were doing.
It started as a nativist organization. The word nativist means Native Americans, which is a kind of a weird word because a lot of these people came over from Europe, from England and northern Germany and the Norway and Sweden, and their offspring or themselves who came over populated most of Manhattan. It was when the Irish came over in the potato famines in the 60s that things began to change. Now the Irish had a great penchant for politics. They were great at politics. They also had a great penchant for bars. They all had own bars, and they had a great penchant for gangs. So, apart from the hardworking Irish, you had gangs, and then the gang leaders moved up into politics. So, by the time 1900 rolled around, New York City was a Democratic city. It was completely controlled by the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party completely was controlled by Tammany Hall, which was a collection of politicians who had enormous power because they bribed everybody. And the police department, you couldn't get onto the police department if you didn't go through Tammany Hall. And once you were on the police department, you collected bribes all over the city. And once you got elected, you gave kickback contracts to Tammany Hall. It was a single party control. Every once in a while, there was a Republican who popped up. There's one great scene where all the gangsters are together, and they even said, and Sam Paul was there too. Even though he was a Republican, he was crooked enough that he qualified. So it basically was the power of the Democratic Party. It lasted until 1913, and it continued on. Tammany didn't disappear. It remained a power in New York, but not like it was from 1900 to 1913. They controlled the vote. If you didn't vote for the Tammany line, you got beat over the head with a baseball bat. In fact, there's a scene in the book where Big Tim Sullivan, who controlled the Bowery, which was all Jewish, was confronted by a prosecutor who said, "Did you read the New York Times? They said in one of your districts, the vote was 392 for the Tammany candidate and 2 for the non-Tammany candidate." And Big Tim Sullivan says, "That's perfect proof of fraud. Some politician got 2 votes in my district. It's impossible. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm going to file a lawsuit." Like, you either voted for Tammany or wound up in the gutter with your head busted. So that's what it was. It went on even into the late 1900s. I had Tammany people at my bar mitzvah, believe it or not, but it was no longer what it was. It was just a political organization, had no power like it had. Where it did have influence all along was with unions. That it did. But by the time 1913 rolled around, the socialists and the communists had gotten control of the unions in New York, and Tammany was reduced to nothing.
There's a lot of violence. I didn't realize the amount of violence.
It was, let's call it this way, there's a lot of violence now. Think of the poor people in South Chicago, all shooting each other. But there was more visible violence then because it was visible. The violence was club wielding killers walking the streets and gangs clashing for power and the vote. Everyone was fighting over the vote. The vote gave you all the power. In fact, the Annenbergs in Chicago were the leaders of the newspaper wars. In those days, there was no cell phones, no internet. You got your news through the newspapers. And you went to a newspaper stand and you picked out a newspaper and you read it. And that's where your news came from. Now in Chicago, there were competing newspaper chains, 3 of them. But if you had the non-favored newspaper up front, their newspaper slugger gangs would come along and beat up the newspaper seller. And then he would put their newspaper in front, and then other gangs from the other newspapers would come along, and he'd beat the hell out of them and kill them. There were bodies all over the place. And by the way, that's how the Annenbergs got started, leading the newspaper wars. And then Moses Annenberg moved out of that, but by the time he died in the mid-30s, he controlled the betting wire, he controlled the racetracks, he controlled a lot of criminal enterprises, and his son Walter then tried to clean up the Annenberg name by buying TV Guide and Teen Magazine and all those things. But the origins of the Annenbergs were pretty rough. And a lot of them are that way. But I say with a great deal of pride, anyone who reads this book will not only read a great story, it's a page turner. Every chapter has a cliffhanger or a major event, but you'll learn a lot. You'll learn things you didn't know.
Oh, that's true.
And by the way, PatZi, I didn't know it either until I got into it. I had no clue.
Yeah, it's funny. I knew the Irish had Tammany Hall, and I thought most of the gangs were Italian.
No. There were Italian gangs led by Paul Kelly in New York. In Chicago, Big Jim Colosimo and Johnny Torrio controlled the levy, but they were all controlled by the Irish aldermen. So the level beneath the Irish were the Jewish and Italian gangs. In the Bowery, it was Monk Eastman originally, and then Big Jack Zelig took over from him. And he was key in the Becker Rosenthal murders because he knew the truth and he was murdered. So it's very violent. And remember, in those days, violence was not people took knives to each other in clubs. It was gruesome. They didn't use bow and arrows either. It was clubs and bats and knives.
I grew up in Detroit, and I lived on the street where the building where the Purple Gang were killed.
The Purple Gang's in my book, but they're all kids. They're 14 and 15 years old at a reform school in Detroit. And by prohibition, Abe Bernstein led them to become a power in importation of alcohol. And they were always fighting with Capone in Chicago. But the Purple Gang came just a little later. And then after that, in New York came Murder Incorporated, which was basically Jewish, but under the control of an Italian lead. You almost need a Ouija board to figure all this out. There was so much interplay. And in fact, one interesting comment is that at the Atlanta conference, which was important in Boardwalk Empire, all the gangsters assembled, and Moses and Max Annenberg were there. But of all the Irish gangsters, hundreds of them, there was only one there. Only the Killer Madden, who was a bootlegger from New York in Hell's Kitchen. He was the only one. Everyone else had been banished.
As you said, it is a page turner. I think people will love it for so many reasons. I loved it mostly for the New York part. I got a kick out of you take us to New York. You really do.
Something I when I was finishing the book, people say to me, "What was the most startling thing you learned?" And I said, I opened the book with what I consider my pride and joy, my 10-page prologue, which is pretty hard, but it sets the tone for the book, and it haunts the book right through to the end in many different ways that you find out as you go through the book. But what astonished me the most, and because you read it, there was a big chase after the murder in the bar, and the big chase from the 5 Points back to the Bowery where the Jews lived. And to me, when I created that, or when I read the historical truths about the period and everything else, to me it was like miles, that the 5 Points was miles away from the Bowery, because the Irish didn't go into the Bowery, and the Jews certainly didn't go into the 5 Points. That was for sure. And the Italians didn't go into the 5 Points, and the Irish didn't go into the Italian ghetto, which was right next to it was next door to the Bowery, on Bowery, which is a street. So I walked it with a tape measure, and I taped all the streets to see how big it was. And the most astonishing thing was the Bowery was like 10 blocks by 10 blocks. There were 100 synagogues, 500 seltzer plants, 500 houses of prostitution. You couldn't make this up. It's insane. But the most startling thing was this concept that they were so far apart, 4 blocks. I walked the southern part, southwestern part of the Bowery to the 5 Points, which is where the book starts, which now is the federal courthouse. 4 blocks, 4 big blocks, but 4 blocks. Took me 5 minutes. It was like there was an artificial wall that had been built there psychologically that trapped people on different sides of it. But it was so close you could touch it. That freaked me out. That gave me shivers.
A mental ghetto for each,
Yeah,
really.
yeah, it's true. It was astonishing.
Now, have you been in contact with any of the relatives of the people you talk about in the book? Have you?
No, they've been dead. There's not a person there who
Not,
hasn't been dead 100 years.
no.
So I haven't. No one's sued me yet. But if they're going to sue me, they're going to come across. They're going to come against a pretty tough, hardened, and experienced trial lawyer.
Yeah,
So
I don't think they're going to
be
do
my
that.
guest.
Yeah. Although some of these people might not appreciate that you brought up their past. Yeah.
Go read the nonfiction books about them. It's all there.
Well, I think you've done a wonderful job. I know that I said that you have chutzpah because I know that you wrote a script in 3 days once when you didn't have a script and you were selling it.
First movie, I sold it. I sold it. I didn't have the script. I wrote it over the weekend, handed it on Monday, and the picture was made. It's now a cult classic.
I know, and it's as a script writer, I think we all hold you in high esteem because that that's pretty nervy to do that.
By the way, each of my books started as a screenplay. I used that as an outline for dialogue and character establishment. And then I solve a lot of the plots within that. All the books started the same way. Then I abandon the script, I leave it aside, and then I go to novel. It's the same thing as doing an outline. It's just I'm very comfortable as a screenwriter. It's easier.
Of course, when somebody picks up this new book, you'll have some input into the scripts, but it's a big deal when you're doing so many programs. But
I could produce a movie because I've produced enough of them, but I could never do a miniseries. You need an experienced showrunner
oh yeah, it's major.
who knows how to put together an 8 or 10 part series. I wouldn't even aspire to that, but I would partner up with someone like that, and I would concentrate on the creative side because there's a lot of stuff that's not in the book that's in my head that could go into it. No, in a miniseries, you need an experienced showrunner.
I think you're going to get it. And first of all, let's turn this into a bestseller. I think if you have to keep promoting it and doing this kind of thing, I hope that you get some good pre-sales. The book is coming out on the 17th of June. right?
And it's been pre-order. It's been in pre-order for about a month, 6 weeks.
Good.
I,
Okay.
the people say, "How's it doing?" I said, "I have no
You
clue."
you have no idea. You'll know on release date, but I do encourage people to get the book because it's a great book. You'll love it. It really, when you think of it, as a matter of fact, Father's Day is coming up. Oh, this would be a great gift for Father's Day. I think
Especially if the father is a gangster, he'll love it.
if he loves it, but if he likes action, and a lot of people do like to read the book first and imagine who's going to get the part. So this is also something people like, and there's enough action in there to keep everybody intrigued.
I appreciate it and thank you for that. There's plenty of action.
Plenty
Is
of
that
action. Uh,
that's an understatement, and
well,
plenty of plot twisting that'll turn you into a knot.
that's exactly what we need in a good book. And I think that you've created something that people will enjoy. And I think people are going to run with it once they pick this series up because it's got a lot of potential as a streaming series. Not, and the wonderful thing about if you get a lot of sales for the book, that's what we are hoping for. And then once you have the series, then you get even more sales. That's the nature of things nowadays.
There'll be one clause in any deal I do. I've made a lot of deals in the movie business, but there'll be one clause in, let's say, a streamer deal or a movie deal, and that is we go back and we stuff the book into the bookstores. That's when we come back around.
Yeah. Oh, that will happen if you get a streaming deal. Definitely, it'll be in the bookstores. Then they'll all want it. So I just want to thank you so much, Jeffrey Konvitz, for being on Joy on Paper Live. I think the book's terrific, and I think you have a website, right? Circus of
Yeah,
Satan.
there it is.
And I was going to have
All the reviews are there.
you explain that. Explain the Circus of Satan. The We forgot to mention why it's called the circus.
I'm happy to tell you. First, there was a section in New York, I think I mentioned it, called the Tenderloin, which was high-end vice, and the Protestant preachers called it Satan's Circus because it was so depraved. But the second thing that happened as I was writing, my character started to characterize his life as a circus of Satan with demonic tumblers, acrobats, lion tamers, clowns, with the Dark Prince in the middle of the three-ring circus directing everything because his life had been so dark. In the end, it turned to the light, but his life had been so dark, so that he characterized his own life as a circus of satanic events. So it has a double meaning. And when you read the book, you see it. It's explained in there.
Jeffrey, I think you did a great job with this book, and I think you're an inspiration because when you were rejected, you didn't give up. You kept going, and 30 whatever number of rejections, you didn't stop.
Really important, and I tell other writers this who ask me the question, you got to believe in what you're doing. And if you believe in what you're doing and your heart's in it, and you believe it's good, even if most people don't, at some point you got to be realistic with yourself. But you got to keep pushing it and not give up if someone else says, it's not so good. What do they know?
Yeah.
This is a very creative internal process that only you really know if something is important to you. If it's not important to them, everybody has their opinion. That's fine. I've had people go crazy over the Sentinel. I've had other people say no. One of my favorite movies in the last 10 years was Inception. I loved it because it was so original and so phenomenal psychologically, the dream states. And then I read a review that called it a piece of garbage. There you go. One person's garbage is another person's fabulous movie. And then there are movies that have won Oscars, even the one that won this year, Nuri. I didn't think it was very good. That's me. But okay, what do I know?
You do know about the mob. You do know about mobsters more than most people, and you've used all that knowledge to come out with a really wonderful read, a great book. As I said, a good Father's Day book and a nice read for over the summer. And I wish you the best of luck. The book, and oh, and if you do get a deal, you have to promise to come on and announce it here on Joy on Paper.
If I get a deal without revealing the specifics of the numbers, or we put the project together, because I'm one of the founders of the independent film business. I created most of the concepts that they use today in the late 70s and early 80s. I'm happy to come back with you and describe exactly how it all came together.
Oh, I would love that. And by the way, you have the best publicist in LA, Kim Dower, who has been on my program many times because she always has great advice for authors. And I know she's will do a great job for you.
I said to her, "You're a poet. What do you want to? What do you want with this violent book?" And she read the book and said, "I love the book." So I said, "All right, so much for poetry."
That's yeah, she's been on for her poetry books and she reads her poetry, which I love. And but when I know when she tells me you're going to love this book, I knew I would love this book because she has the best judgment, and I know she's going to do a great job for you. So I look forward to having you back in a few months. Okay.
Thank you, PatZi.
Okay, thank you so much. It's been a joy to talk to you.
Me too.
Okay, bye bye now. Bye. It was so much fun to talk to Jeffrey Konvitz about his book, The Circus of Satan: Murder, Revenge, and the Rise of Organized Crime. The violent historical novel that offers up a stark reflection of our own turbulent times. Old and new fans alike will revel in the sprawling epic of real-life political horror. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to Joy on Paper so that I can bring you more interviews with fascinating authors. All you have to do is click that button, subscribe, comment, and share. Bye-bye now.